contract?
That's not a bad idea for me to.
I mean, it's already in the
It's already signed, then compliance is gonna look at it.
How do I know compliance is gonna look at it?
Then that is part of.
Because I've had it for like 5 days.
Okay.
Did I not, did I miss a step?
We need to get it loaded into command and get that shared.
Okay, so I gotta learn about command.
Yes.
So,
And me now.
do I?
And I'm not able to make you the host. Okay. I'm gonna make you the host, so you're the only ones that's gonna be able to add people to the room.
Okay.
Okay, so you can watch and police it. And then I'm going to share my screen. Awesome. Okay. Mindy, you had a question to start out.
So, let's say I can't go to all the nights because I'm working like 3 days a week. I work from 6 in the morning till about 11,
Okay.
right? But I'll make every single one that I can because I'm desperate for the knowledge.
Then you have the option to either take it and then make the missed classes up the next time it rolls through, or just come in for the information. Don't have to pay anything, don't have to register, show up, take the class.
Last time I spoke to you,
Yep. Think of it like auditing a college class. Okay.
on the ones I can make.
On the ones you can make. And then we'll find an online option for you.
I'm doing an online class because I
And that's
gotta
gonna
take,
get your post license.
I've got to,
No, fantastic.
and I guess I just missed that step, right? About take a post test in a year.
Yeah.
And my broker didn't say, hey buddy, how you doing with it?
Yep.
You know, so I'm like,
So maybe get done. All right. So today we're here to talk about appraisals. And Mandy, really glad to have you here in person. Mandy, glad to see you online. So we've got the Mandy brothers in here. We may have some other people joining in. So Jasmina, please keep an eye on that. But appraisals. So the idea at the end of the day, once you guys understand how to look at an appraisal, know where the most important information is on the appraisal, what the appraiser's telling us about the value of the property and how it compares, so that we know, is it a good appraisal or a bad appraisal? Is it accurate, or are there issues with it? Because there's going to be times, and especially in today's market, where appraisals may come back under the contract price, and that can mess the transaction up. So if we've got an opportunity to challenge an appraisal and get the appraiser to raise it, fantastic. Increases the likelihood of us getting to the closing table. But we'll talk more about what that looks like going forward. Jasmina, you can hear me just fine as far as volume goes?
Yep, everything is good.
Okay, awesome. This is our first time with this new technology for me. So let's just go ahead and start moving forward. So I brought a couple of example appraisals with me that you guys can flip through if you want to. Typically, an appraisal is going to be somewhere between 30 and 40 pages long. So it's a bunch, okay? But there's just a very small little piece of that we really care about and we want to take a closer look at. So we're going to highlight and move in on some of these pages. And it's really the 2 first pages you get to that look like this. And this is a standardized form. They've been using the same appraisal form since 2005, okay? So every appraiser is going to look just like this, okay? So it's not going to be unique. And we're going to go in and we're going to look at each of these 2 pages in a little more detail. So the first one, when we look up at that top section, what we're starting to do with this first page is all information about our subject property, okay? What's the property we're looking at and we're trying to get a value on. So it's going to talk about who was this appraisal ordered for, who's the buyer, okay, who's the owner of the property, the legal description. Most of this really doesn't matter, okay? But I may have to come back to this and make sure some of this is accurate later, if there's an issue with it. We've got our tax information, whether it's fee simple, leasehold. I've never seen anything but a fee simple. Why are we requesting an appraisal? It's for a purchase, okay? And they're going to continue to give us more information. You know, the property is currently listed. This is the Georgia MLS number. Here's how long it's been on the market. Here's the details of the contract, okay? So the appraiser knows what's the value we're shooting for when they do this appraisal, okay? That shouldn't influence the value, right? It doesn't matter what somebody's offering on a property as far as what the value is, at least in an appraiser's mind, okay? They're looking at historical data, because what's the best indication of value of a home? What's the same thing as the best indication of value for anything? It's what a willing buyer would accept from a willing seller, okay? So when we look at the value of a car, for example, it's not just because Ford says the car's worth this, it's because there's buyers out there that have been willing to pay that amount before. If Ford were to come out with their new Ford Taurus and they were to list it for $1 million, how many buyers would they have? None, right? So the car's not worth $1 million. And the market is who sets that price. And so for us, the market's really who's going to determine the value of a property. And that's what we're going to wind up on a contract. But before the bank lends money, they want to know, is that contract in keeping with the market? Because you may find that one person that's willing to pay $350 for the property, but what the bank is worried about is, what if they don't pay their mortgage payment and we have to take the property back? What could we turn around and sell it for? Okay, so that's the purpose of an appraisal. It is the banks looking to cover their butt. They want to make sure that they're not getting in over their head on a loan. So that's the reason that contract price is in here. In the middle section, that's where we start getting into some of the specifics about the property. What's the neighborhood look like? Is it rural? Is it suburban? Is it urban? What's the built up? How dense is everything? Are most of the home sites taken? Is the growth? Is this a growing community, a stable, or is it in decline? Okay. One unit housing trends, property values, increasing, stable, or declining. What's the demand, shortage, imbalance, oversupply? So you can see right now, this was a little dated, okay? This was back at the end of the year last year, because what do you think they would put as the demand or supply right now? It would be there's a shortage of properties, right? Not in balance. And what's the typical marketing time? Under 3 months. So things are moving quickly, okay? Other things in there, they're gonna have descriptions of the neighborhood, descriptions of the market. Then they're gonna talk about the property itself. What's the dimensions of the space? What's the square footage of the lot, okay? What's the shape of the lot? What utilities are available? And the reason we're looking at all this is the appraiser's got to look at the most comparable properties, okay? You can't draw a comparison between an apple and an orange, right? If I want to figure out what an apple's worth, I need to look at other apples that have sold, not look at what oranges have sold for. Does that make sense? So this is how we're going to decide, are we comparing apples to apples, okay? The bottom section is where we get specific on the property. Is it a multifamily unit? Is it a single family unit? Is it detached or attached? Meaning, does it share a wall? Is it a townhome or a freestanding home? Okay, it's going to talk about whether it's got a basement, how you get access to it, how many fireplaces, driveways, all the main features of the house we're going to identify here. And then they're going to get into the condition of the property, okay? We've got rooms, bedrooms, our bathrooms, and our square footage. Okay, and you'll notice that square footage is above grade. is going to talk about additional features, anything that's unique to the property or might add some extra value. They're going to list in here. And they're going to talk about the condition of the property. And they give us an abbreviation here, which is C3, okay? There's been no updates in the previous 15 years. That was not true. No functional nor external obsolescence was noted for the subject property. Physical depreciation exists just in normal wear and tear, and no significant deferred maintenance, okay? All those would be red flags. All those would be depreciators of value if they did exist, okay? Are there any physical deficiencies or adverse conditions that affect livability? No. Does the property generally conform to the neighborhood? Yes, okay? And again, those answers may be different on a different property, but we want the bank to know what's this property that we're trying to pull a value on, okay? Making sense so far?
Yes.
All right, so that's our subject property. Now we're gonna go look for comps, okay? How does this property compare with other properties? And that's our next page, okay? And you'll see when you zoom in on this page, it lists it in columns, okay? So your first column here is our subject property. Then we have 3 different comps that are put here. And these are going to be our main 3. And you'll see in a second that on some appraisals, you may have 6. Some of you may have 12. Okay, on this example, there's actually 12 comps that they pull for this property. But most appraisers are only going to look at 5 or 6 properties. They may put 9 in there, okay? But those are just for added information. They really didn't factor them into their calculations, okay? Now what we have to do is we take each one of these individually and we figure out what adjustments need to be made. We've got house A and house B. Well, here's a difference between the 2 of them. One's got this square footage, one has this square footage. What sort of adjustment would we expect that to be? And that's what all these calculations are as we move across. So when we look at our subject property was 495 Cabot. When we look at the house next door, which is 505 Cabot, first thing you'll see is 0.001 miles, okay, away. It is the next door house. It was listed for sale for $319, okay. It was 21 days on the market. Now here, they gave $5,000 in seller's contributions to closing when they sold that house. But here you'll see they didn't make any adjustment to the price because anything under 5% of seller's contributions to closing is considered normal, okay? So if there was no contributions to closing, they don't make an adjustment. If there's 1,000, they don't make an adjustment. If it's up to 5%, they don't make an adjustment. That doesn't work in today's market, but that's the way appraisers do their calculations, okay? 5,000 would make you less competitive in today's market, okay? Then we've got our date of sale and the time. So now we can see how old are these comps, okay? And typically speaking, how far back does an appraiser want to go? No more than a year, okay? But in a fastly changing market like we're in right now, are values from a year ago a good comparable? I'd say no, okay? We want ones that are closer in time that tells what's happening in the market right now. So in these cases, you know, this was done back in December, maybe. So this one went under contract in November, was sold in December. This one under contract in May, it sold in July. This one under contract in August, sold in September. So we can see how old are these comps compared to our time. So what's the location? It's a neighborhood, it's residential. How's the ownership? They're all fee simple. How big is the lot? Well, ours was 5,227 square feet. This one was 5,227 square feet. They made no adjustment, okay? These two, they were bigger, okay? But not enough bigger that the appraiser felt like it gave those properties any added value, okay? So we continue to work down, all the styles were traditional, and then we've got quality of construction. So, and there's a ranking system there. So all of these ranked Q4. So as far as build quality goes, when they were first built, they were all built to the same standard. Then we have how old are they? Well, ours was 5 years old. So this house that was 6 years old, they said that you'd have to add $200 to it to make it the equivalent of ours. And this one over here that is 2,300 years old, you'd have to add $3,600 to make it better. So one of the things I want you to take away from that is how old your house is does not affect the price by a huge difference. You're talking about a house that's 23 years older, okay? And we're in the $350,000 range, is only a $3,000 difference. Only 1% for 23 years, okay? So age of home's not gonna be a big factor. But for owners of homes, do they think that's a big factor? My house is 20 years newer. You know, they think that means they get a huge amount more. No, that makes your home worth about $3,000 more, okay? Then we have the condition. And he marked all of these as being the same condition. And I'll show you in the appraisal report, a lot of these codes that they put in here, there's a chart in here, in every appraiser puts that chart in there, that here are the common codes. So you can go back and you can look and see, what does C3 mean? What does Q4 mean? Okay? So you don't have to have those memorized. But here's where we really start getting into some adjustments, is we look at the gross living area. And so ours was 2,600 square feet. The next door neighbor was 2,600 square feet, so they made no adjustment. The next one was 2,600 square feet. They made no adjustment. The next one was 2,410 square feet. So what they did is they said, if this house had been 2,600 square feet, it would have been worth $2,700 more, okay? Because this house only had 2.5 baths. If it had 3 full baths like the other, it would be worth $1,500 more, okay? Here, when it gets to the basement, this has 1,100 square feet of basement, 913 feet of it are finished. This property has 1,100 square feet of basement, but none of it is finished. So if it had been finished, this house would have been worth $13,700 more, okay? This one didn't have a basement. So for our finished basement of 900 square feet, they're saying this house would be $22,000 more, okay? Do you see how these adjustments work in each of these categories, okay? Then it just has, you know, how's the utility, you know, the house is as easy to use as the others. It's got the same heating and cooling system. None of them have any interior efficiencies. All of them have a garage. All of them have a porch. But this one here, they've got a bigger deck. So if they had the same size deck that we had, their house would be worth $1,000 less. This one was missing the porch, so it would be worth $1,500 more if it had a porch, okay? Then in the exterior construction, all of these had brick accents, but this one had brick front. If it didn't have brick front and only had brick accents, it would be worth $500 less, okay? That's how an appraiser thinks, is they go through and they make all these line item adjustments, and they decide that if we took this house and we made this house look like this one, it would be worth $333,000. And this house would be worth $310,000, and this house would be worth $316,000, okay? So based on that information, I've now got 3 houses that look exactly like the subject property because I've made all these adjustments. So the value of our house ought to be somewhere between this range, okay? And when those numbers are really close together, it gets really easy to do that. But when they're ranging from 330 down to 310, well, that's why we need comparable number 4, comparable number 5, comparable number 6. So we get more data points so we can see what's the trend, okay? Now this was the top of that third page. This is what the bottom looks like, okay? And it says at the top, I did research the sale or transfer history of the subject property. My research did not reveal any prior sales in the past 3 years. My research did reveal prior sales for the year prior to the date of the sale of the comparable property. So some of the comps sold in the last year, which that should always be yes, okay? Where did they get their information? We got it from MLS and from deed records, okay? And they told us when those sales took place, okay? And they did an analysis of the prior sales. So here's what the sales history looks like for the subject property from the time it was sold as a lot to the builder, when the builder first sold it, when they sold it to the next owner, and when they sold it to us, okay? Now, here's the summary of what their process and their thinking is, okay? This is the way we come up with a value. All comps were chosen from the same market area and had the same general appeal. All were within Fannie Mae guidelines regarding the net and gross adjustments. So I'm going to go back to the top up here. Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac, and lenders do not want to see massive adjustments, okay? There's a limit on how much of an adjustment. So I can't go take a 6,000 square foot house and compare it to a 1,000 square foot house. That's too big of an adjustment. We're guessing blindly because life in a 6,000 square foot house looks very different than life in a 1,000 square foot house. We can't make those adjustments, you know? So coming back to here, all have sold within the last 12 months. That's kind of par for the course, okay? Don't want to ever look more than 12 months back unless you just simply cannot find enough data. And if we can look over a shorter period of time, that's what we're going to want to do, okay? All are located within 2 radial miles from the subject property. Well, typically, appraisers only want to look 1 mile or less from the subject property. And the closer they can look, the better the comps are. But they said it was necessary to expand this distance in order to find the nearest recent comparable sales. We'll talk about that when we get to rebuttal in a minute. All of the comparable sales and listings had typical seller concessions between 0 and 5%. No adjustment is needed unless a concession has been made that exceeds these limits, okay? So that $5,000 seller's contributions to closing, that was less than 5%. So we didn't have to make an adjustment to the value of the house. And then we get down to the most important parts of this. And that is right here, our indicated value, okay, which you're going to see here, and you're going to see it repeated down here at the bottom, okay? And this appraisal is made as is, okay? So they had some options. The appraiser could mark that this appraisal is made as is, or it's subject to certain things being done, okay? A good example of that would be our contract says that we're going to replace the roof, okay? So our appraisal is made assuming the new roof is already on, okay? Because that's on our contract, okay? Or in the case of they come and do an appraisal on a new construction home, they may not have finished the new construction, okay? We may still have some punch list items, may still need to put in the railing on the front porch, whatever the case is, but it's subject to completion per the plans and specifications on the basis of the hypothetical condition that the improvements have already been done, okay? Or this appraisal is being made subject to the following repairs or alterations, okay? Meaning there were issues at the property that FHA is not going to approve, or the VA is not going to accept, or USDA is not going to accept. So we can't use this appraisal unless the following repairs are made, okay? And down here, this report's been made to estimate fair market value. This is valid for the date listed below. Future values may vary. I want to show you a different one that was subject to. So this appraisal is made subject to the following repairs or alterations, okay? And then it says the appraisal is subject to, let me move that out of the way so that we can see it. They can see it at home. That right here. Subject to the MPR repairs noted in the addendum. And they list what they are. There's got to be a roof evaluation, a stucco evaluation, and a limb removal. And so on this particular appraisal, when you go to the addendum section, the appraiser had listed out what the expectations were for the roof evaluation, the expectations for the stucco evaluation, and what limbs need to be removed. So Fannie Mae was not going to underwrite this loan. The loan was not going to get approved unless those repairs were done. Okay. So going back, when I get an appraisal, the first thing I'm going to look at is what's my appraised value and are there any conditions? And really, quite honestly, that's all I care about, right? And very often in a deal, just being very practical, we're not even going to see the appraisal and don't care if we see the appraisal. If I'm on the seller side of the transaction, the buyer is the one that's paying for the appraisal. The lender is who's ordering it, okay? I don't have any access to it. The appraisal is going to get shared first with the lender, and the lender may or may not share it with the buyer, okay? And I don't care if the appraisal is good, okay? If our contract says we're buying the property for $350,000, it does not matter to me if the appraisal was for $351,000, $359,000, or $390,000, okay? And quite honestly, if it is $390,000, I don't want to know because I probably don't want my seller to know. Because what are they going to feel like if they found out their house appraised for $40,000 more than we got it under contract for? Okay? All I want to know is it's good and we can move forward. Where I have concerns is if the appraisal is low, meaning the buyer's going to be asking me to reduce, or we're going to have to work something out because the lender's not going to give them all the money they were hoping to get to buy that house. On the buyer side, I really don't care what the appraisal is. I care that it's good, okay? It's high enough that my buyer can get the loan they wanted to get to buy the property, okay? Does that make sense?
Yeah.
But a lot of lenders are just going to send it to the buyer, okay? And they're going to be able to look at it and see everything that's on there. They're probably going to send it to you and say, hey, I just got the appraisal. What does this mean? And that's when you get to tell them everything that we just talked about. But it really doesn't matter. If we're under contract for $350,000 and the appraisal comes back for $350,000, great. The bank's going to write the loan that we need to buy the house. If the appraisal comes back at $360,000, great. The bank's going to write the loan that we need to buy the house. It really doesn't matter. Does that make sense?
Of course.
Good. All right. So let's keep looking. So after those pages, and there's going to be many more pages to come because we've only looked at 2. Remember, the appraisal is 30 to 40 pages long. They're going to have a couple of other approaches to determining value. And if you think back to your pre-licensing class, they talked about there being different ways to figure out the value of a home. Well, here in Georgia, the comparable sales method is the only method we use. Okay, I've never seen an appraisal based on any method other than that, but they do put it in the appraisal. So they will do a cost approach. Okay, so in this case, they've looked at the square footage, estimated what the price per square foot to build is, and they came up with that to rebuild the house, it would cost $315,000. And then they do an income approach to value. Okay. Well, this wasn't required by Fannie Mae. This was an FHA loan, so the appraiser didn't do it, but they may do that. And what the income approach is if I were to rent the property out and it were to generate an income, what would we anticipate that income be? And what should our investment be based on that income? Okay, what's a reasonable estimation? That's not a great way to value a property either. okay? It's a great way to evaluate an investment, not a great way to determine the value of a property, okay? Then we're gonna have several pages that give us definitions and limitations, okay? And what I mean by limitations is a lot of this is just legalese garbage that talks about how the appraiser can't know this, they're not responsible for this. Here's what we do, here's what we can't do, okay? But it defines some of the terms that are on there. Then we get to our additional comps. And so this is where they had comp 4, 5, and 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. You're probably not going to see that many pages on most appraisals. Very often you'll just see 6, sometimes you'll see 9, rarely you'll see 12 like you did on this one, if they feel like they were struggling to find a value, okay? And then you're going to have a whole bunch of other pages that are addendums and pictures and maps, and I can show you really quickly kind of what that looks like. This is all just supplemental information to what's been presented, but I'm not going through this for any details. There's nothing in here for me to challenge. This is just, we use this comp, here's a picture of the front of that house. Here's a picture of the front of our house. Here's where our property is on the map. Here's where the locations of the comps are on the map. Here's what C3, C4, C5 mean on so those last pages, don't worry about them. If you ever want to dig in there and look at them, I've got them here. But what we need to determine is when we get an appraisal, is it a good appraisal or is it a bad appraisal? And what I mean by this is I'm probably not going to hear about an appraisal unless it's lower than the contract price. And I'm going to, if that's the case, I'm going to get sent one. If I'm the listing agent, the buyer's agent's going to send me a copy of the appraisal and say, hey, the appraisal came in low and we want you to reduce the price to what the appraisal said. In the case of Tidewater, we get an early look. And what Tidewater is with the VA. The VA has a great system that when an appraiser goes out to do a VA appraisal and they sit down and they start putting together all their calculations and it does not look like they're going to come up with the contract price, the VA appraiser says, hey, before I put ink to paper and I say, this is what the house is worth, I want you to send me all your information on why you think the house is worth what the contract price is, okay? So with the VA, they've got a built-in system for challenging a low appraisal before it ever becomes an appraisal, okay? And they call that Tidewater. So if you ever get a call from a lender that says, hey, the appraiser's invoked Tidewater, you know that your appraisal's in danger of coming in low and you need to start your research. You need to go find them the right comps for them to use. They're going to support your sales price, okay? But here's our first evaluation. When we get an appraisal and it's low, there really are two options. There are times where the market's going to bid a property up because we're moving up rapidly, and this is what we're dealing with right now, okay? That buyers are competing and prices are getting jacked up, okay? And the appraiser goes and they do their research and they go look at the recent sales, but all of the recent sales of very similar properties are $10,000, $15,000, $20,000 less, okay? The data's right. Those are good comps. Those are recent comps. Those are similar properties, but they don't support our price. Nothing has sold that supports our price, but it's because of how fast the market's been moving upwards. You're going to have a really hard time in that case challenging that appraisal because it's a good appraisal. All the information is good, okay? But what we're looking for when we get that low appraisal is it a bad appraisal, okay? That's where we have opportunities. And what I mean by it being a bad appraisal is I think that there's a flaw in it, okay? And I can challenge it when I think that there's a flaw. But how I challenge it may be different depending on who the lender is. So my first phone call is always going to be to the lender, asking them, what's your process for challenging the appraisal, okay? And they're gonna tell us, well, just email me the comps you think that should have been included in the appraisal. Email me your explanation, we'll pass that on to the lender. Or they're gonna have a form that you fill out and create that asks you for all the pertinent information. And I'm gonna show you an example of that here in just a minute, of one that I did. Or they're gonna have somewhere online that they'll send you a link that you can go log in and you'll put all your criteria, all your information in there to challenge it. Well, what can you challenge, okay? And again, it goes back to if the data is correct and the comps are good and the houses are similar, there's really not anything to challenge. Here's what we can challenge is one, factual errors, okay? So I wanted you to see that very first page because we've seen cases of the appraiser had the square footage wrong, okay? Our house is actually 500 square feet more than the appraiser used for all their calculations. Well, boom, you get that fixed. All their numbers changed. We've now got a good appraisal, okay? I've seen an appraisal before where the appraiser did not include the basement. They gave zero value for the basement. Either they didn't know it existed, they forgot to include it, they got too busy, they're doing it too late at night. But in any case, the basement wasn't there. Okay, that's an easy factual error to correct. That same thing can also happen with the comps that they use. What if they gave comps on another property and they had the square footage of that other property as being too much? Okay, and they gave it, they took value away from that comp because it was more square footage than ours. But it turns out that our property and that property are the same. So I'm looking for mistakes on the data on my property and mistakes for data on any of the comparable properties. The second thing is, are there better comps available? Okay, it's subjective in a lot of ways. Which properties does an appraiser choose to compare you to? And so when we talk about a good comp, a quality comp, there's really 4 criteria that we're looking at, okay? And we talk about this in pulling comps and determining the value of the property. The first one is going to be location, okay? That's the most important factor in determining the value of a property. You take a $100,000 house here in the outskirts of Grayson, Georgia, and you move it to Redondo Beach, California, is it still a $100,000 house? No, it's a $1.1 million house, okay? That's the power that location has, okay? And one of the things to keep in mind from location is the closer a property is, the better comp that it is, okay? So if they're going 2 miles out to find a comp and they skipped over the house that's 3 doors down, I'd rather them use the house 3 doors down if it supports my price, okay? But I also have to be careful too, and this is where appraisers can go wrong, is I want you to think about, they talked about that they look in a 1 mile radius, okay? Well, I have 3 houses right here. This one is my subject property right there, okay? Which of these is the better comp? Well, our instinct says that it's this one, okay? But what you didn't realize, Manny, is right there is the county line. And this house right here is in a inferior school system and has a higher tax rate. So now, which one of those is the better comp? It's that one over there. So I just tell you that to remind you that location is not always just geographic in nature. There's some other factors that we look at when we're talking about location. The second most important factor is going to be square footage. It's the size of the home. And understand that most appraisers and the best appraisals have the least adjustments, okay? And so if we're having to make big adjustments for square footage, that's hard to do. The bigger the adjustments, the more opportunity for inaccuracy is. So we want houses that are very similar in size, okay? And one of the things to keep in consideration with that is basements, okay? And finished basements versus unfinished basements. In an ideal world, if I have a home with a finished basement, I would like all of my comps to be homes with finished basements. If I can't do homes with finished basements, I at least want to compare it to other homes with basements. The worst ones I can use is homes that don't have a basement when mine does, okay? If mine doesn't have a basement, again, I don't want to be comparing it with homes that do. I'd rather find other ranch homes to compare it to. And then the last two categories, which certainly are subjective, is going to be build quality. Okay, and they talked about that in here where they talked about it being a Q4, okay, and then condition. And they gave us a Q3 condition or a C3 condition on our appraisal. These are kind of subjective, you know, but I tend to feel like I'm a good person at being able to recognize that, hey, the granite countertops, the tile floor, the tile backsplash, the stained cabinets are a higher quality than the laminate countertop, the linoleum flooring, the Home Depot cabinets, okay? And then as far as condition goes, stained carpet, deferred maintenance, things like that. But the buckets they use on the appraisal are big buckets. There's like, it's completely trashed, it's livable, it's typical, and it's exceptional. And that's it. So most every house is going to fall into that typical category. It's hard to get an adjustment made for condition on an appraisal. Okay, but not saying it's not possible. So when I look for the better comps, if I can find one that's closer, if I can find one that is more similar in square footage, that's where I'm going to have a good chance to win. And the one that I would add to this is not a determination of value by itself, but if I can find comps that are more recent, those are going to be the criteria that I'm looking for when I'm talking about finding better comps. Some of the other things we can look for is extenuating circumstances, okay? We may have a comp on there that is particularly low, that's dragging our value down. And what the appraiser didn't know is that was sold because of a hardship, that they were going through a divorce, had to be a quick sale. There was a death in the family, the kid sold the property. That was a family member to family member sale. So it wasn't sold for market value. That was an insider price, okay? So that really should not have been used as a comp, okay? And then the subjective adjustments. And some things are really difficult to put a price tag on. For example, what's a swimming pool worth? What's a media room worth, okay? We may be able to argue some value on those, but those are really tough arguments to win, okay? I spent $100,000 on my pool and they only gave me $20,000 in value. You know, that's tough for some homeowners to swallow, okay? But it's also really hard for us to get an appraiser to move off of that, okay? Because there are more people that don't want a pool than do want a pool.
Is that,
right?
is that a true fact? Yeah?
Yeah.
No
Because they don't want the
pool?
maintenance.
Oh, the maintenance.
Yeah. They don't want the added expense. They don't want the maintenance. They don't want the liability. And that's true here, okay? But if I were in a neighborhood in Florida, down in Panama City, I probably need a swimming pool to be just like all of my neighbors, okay? and they're gonna give me more value for that swimming pool in Panama City than they're gonna give me here in Snowville, Georgia. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay. So you gotta look at the industry standards. All right. So this is an example of that particular appraisal we just went through. I ended up having to challenge it. You know, we got an appraisal of 315. We were under contract for 350. Okay. So we needed to get that appraisal up. We knew when we went under contract that we weren't going to get 350. Didn't expect to. If we did, thank our lucky stars, that's fantastic. But what we did expect was 340. Okay. So we felt like we needed to challenge it. So this was a form that they gave us to where they asked us, give us 3 other comps that you feel like were a better comp and tell us why you thought it was a better comp. So this home is a similar build quality with a finished basement within 1 mile and sold 1 month prior to ours, on the market for just 2 days, slightly smaller, so it would be expected that ours would value higher. This sold for $15,000 higher than this appraisal, indicating that our property should appraise for at least $340,000. Okay. So it's both the property, the pertinent information, and an analysis of it. Then we had a page where we were able to go in and share what were our thoughts on the appraisal, what were the issues that we identified. So this was a case where 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 of the comps that they used are all properties without basements. In the absence of enough other sold properties with basements, I could understand the need to use these, but there are plenty of other similar properties with basements for comparison. Additionally, it appears that the adjustments being made for basements are not consistent with how the market values them. In this market, homes with basements are selling for considerably more than what is reflected in the basement adjustments on the appraisal. And so I went on to show them that here's a property without a basement, here's a property with a basement. We were getting more than $22,000 difference as we went through and compared one to another. Okay. Then I shot holes that here was a property that was much older and significantly inferior in terms of build quality. Because remember, he said I had to go 2 miles out. Okay. He didn't have to go 2 miles out. All of the ones that I gave him were within a mile. Okay. But he went far enough out that we wound up in another neighborhood that wasn't done by the same builder, not in the same style. It was an inferior property. Okay. 3 of them were over a year old. And in a quickly appreciating market, these older comps do not reflect today's value. This is further enforced by the current pending and active listings that he included at a much higher valuation than the others, even after adjusting for them not being sold. Okay. So there were properties under contract that he said, well, it's under contract. It was listed for this price. It hasn't sold yet. It's under contract. So I can't give it the full value because I don't know what it's going to sell for. But here's what I expect it's going to sell for. And that was still way higher than what he gave us. Okay. The most recent and most similar property is comparable number 1. It's owned immediately next to the subject property with the same floor plan, but with an unfinished basement. It sold 1 month ago for $5,000 more than this appraisal on the subject property. So the next door neighbor, same floor plan, same age, same square footage, with an unfinished basement, sold for $5,000 more than what he said my house with a finished basement was worth. So somehow the next door neighbor got a good appraisal. This home should have appraised for at least $20,000 more, even if no consideration was made. This is truly a superior home with over $100,000 of improvements made. If consideration was given for the higher quality, then the appraisal should have been for $345,000 to $350,000. I was still wanting that $350,000 appraisal, but then I gave him the better appraisers. Okay. Now he didn't bring us up to $335,000 from the $315,000, but he did bring us up to $335,000. No. $315,000 brought us up to $325,000, and the buyer had already agreed to pay $10,000 over appraisal. So we got it closed for $335,000, which was still $5,000 more than what we thought we were going to wind up with. So we were really happy with the sale. but not real happy with the appraisal. And if we hadn't had a buyer that was willing to pay $10,000 over appraisal, this deal would have been dead.
Right.
And we would have had to put it back on the market and find another buyer and get a conventional loan and get another appraisal and hopefully have a appraiser that would saw things more our way. Okay. And we're confident that would happen. But this is how you challenge an appraisal, is you can't just go in and say, well, I think your appraisal is bad. You've got to give them the data to support it. You've got to show them, here's the proof in the market of our home being worth more than what it is. Here's the flaws that are in there. And understand, this is still not an easy thing to do, because what you're doing is you're calling that appraiser's skill and his professionalism into question. Okay, you're telling him that his judgment, his ability is off. He made a mistake. Nobody likes to admit a mistake. Okay, so you always have to handle it with tact and professionalism.
What's your time frame to do this?
Well, it depends on the contract. Okay, and understand that on your contracts there are limitations in each one of them. So every contract in the financing contingency has an appraisal contingency built in. Okay, so on the FHA and on the VA, the appraisal contingency protects the buyer all the way up to closing. Okay, whereas in the conventional and the USDA loan, there's a very specific timeline that you have to follow as far as what the buyer and the seller's options are. But as long as the buyer and seller agree, and they agree in writing on paper, we can always modify what's in there. And what I mean by that is the conventional loan financing contingency says that if we get a low appraisal, the only thing that the buyer can do is submit an amendment to sales price, asking to reduce the price to the appraisal and send the lower appraisal. Okay, the seller then has 3 days, and only 3 days, to agree to lower it or not lower it. And if they don't agree to lower it, the buyer then only has 3 days to decide to terminate or to move forward. Okay, but if we need more time in there, we can always do an amendment to the contract to allow more time. Okay, but we have to agree to that. So still follow what's in your appraisal contingency until we know that we're running out of time. And then if everybody's in agreement, hey, we want this to work out, but we need some more time, then get everybody to sign a document and we'll be okay. All right. So how to do today? All right. What questions can I answer for you? Jasmine, do you have any questions after this?
Nope, no questions.
All right, fantastic. Manny?
I'm good, thank you, good explanation.
You're very welcome. Manny, how about you? All right. Well, guys, we just about did this right at an hour, so that worked out perfect. If anybody else has questions, give me a call. Talk to you guys soon.